He only knew that the rain was getting worse. He only knew that the woman ahead of him was going to drop everything she was carrying. She was somewhere in her 70s, maybe older, moving in slow, careful steps along the wet sidewalk outside Hargrove Station, her arms wrapped around a cardboard box that had already started to go soft at the bottom. She had a canvas bag looped over one wrist that kept sliding toward her elbow, and every few steps she had to stop and hitch it back up, and every time she stopped, the box shifted, and she'd grip it tighter with fingers that were white from the cold. Nobody slowed down. The commuters moved around her the way water moves around a stone. Umbrellas tilted, briefcases swung, heels clicked on. Everybody had somewhere to be. Camden Brierly watched from the bus shelter for about 4 seconds before he crossed to the street. He didn't think about it. That was the thing people would ask him about later, when the story had become something people told. They would ask what had gone through his mind. And he wouldn't have a good answer, because nothing had gone through his mind. He saw the box going soft, and the bag sliding, and the woman's knuckles white in the November cold, and he stepped off the curb. "Let me take that," he said. She stopped and looked up at him. She had sharp gray eyes behind rain-spotted glasses, and she didn't look frightened, which was the first thing he noticed. She looked the way people look when they've been waiting for something, and it's finally arrived a little later than expected. "The box," she said. "Not the bag." "Yes, ma'am. There are books in it. They're heavy. I can see that." She studied him for a moment longer. He was wearing a dark coat, no umbrella, hair starting to flatten in the rain. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something more interesting. The lines around his eyes deep, the jaw still firm. A man who had gotten old without quite realizing it. "All right," she said. He took the box. She was right. It was heavy. Her name was Adele Marsh, and she lived 6 blocks east, which was not far by any ordinary measure, but was quite far in the rain when you were 74 and your hip had been giving you trouble since September. She told him this without being asked, in the frank and unsentimental way of someone who had long since stopped pretending inconveniences didn't exist. "You don't have an umbrella," she said, walking. "I left it in my car." "Where's your car?" "Parking garage on Clement. That's 4 blocks the wrong direction." "It is," he agreed. She glanced at him sideways. "You're getting soaked. A little. You should have brought your umbrella." "You're not wrong." They walked in silence for half a block. The rain had that particular November quality, cold and indecisive, not quite a downpour, but too serious to be called a drizzle. The box was getting heavier, or maybe his arms were getting tired. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and he'd been on his feet since 6 that morning. "Do you work near here?" she asked. "I have an office on Wentworth." "What kind of office?" He shifted the box. "Law." She made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement or might have been skepticism. "Corporate. Mostly, she repeated. "Diplomatic answer." Camden Brierly had been called many things in his professional life. Diplomatic was not usually one of them. He had been called precise, exacting, occasionally brutal, and by one opposing counsel in a deposition that had run 11 hours, simply relentless. He had built one of the most respected corporate law firms in the city from a 2-room office and a second-hand desk and 30 years of arriving before anyone else and leaving after everyone had gone. He did not say any of this. He said, "I try." Adele's building was a pro-brick 3-story with a green awning that had seen better decades. There were 4 steps up to the door, and she took them carefully, one at a time, and he followed her up and waited while she found her keys. "Do you want to bring it inside?" she said. "It's heavy. Where does it need to go?" "Where does it need to go?" "Second floor. The elevator doesn't work." He looked at the stairs and then at the box and then at her. She was watching him with those sharp gray eyes, and there was something in her expression that was very close to his amusement. "Of course it doesn't," he said. He brought it up. The apartment was small and warm and full of books, in a way that suggested the books were not decorative. They were stacked on shelves that covered every wall, and then continued in piles on the floor and the windowsills, and, in one case, on top of what appeared to be a radiator, which Camden privately thought was a fire hazard but didn't mention. "Set it on the table," she said. He set it on the table, which was itself covered in papers and 2 more books and a coffee mug that had gone cold. He straightened up, slowly. His back said something he ignored. Adele had already moved to the kitchen. He heard the sound of water running, then the knock and hiss of a kettle being placed on a burner. "Tea," she called out. "Unless you're the kind of man who doesn't drink tea." "I drink tea," he said. "Good." He stood there in her small, warm living room and looked at the spines of the books on the nearest shelf. History, mostly. Some biography. A shelf that appeared to be entirely devoted to the American labor movement. He pulled one out without thinking, a worn paperback with a broken spine, and turned it over in his hands. "That one's excellent," said Adele, coming back with 2 mugs. "I've read it 3 times. Once when I was 30 and thought it was a tragedy. Once when I was 50 and thought it was a warning. Last year I thought it was just the truth. He looked at her. What changed? She handed him a mug, perspective. Age. Pick one. He sat where she gestured, in a chair with a pillow on it that had the shape of years of use. She sat across from him on a small sofa with another book open face down on the cushion beside her. The kettle ticked as it cooled. Outside, the rain picked up again. You didn't have to do this, she said. It was not a complaint and it was not gratitude. It was simply an observation. The box was about to go, it was, but people usually just walk past. She sipped her tea. Most people can't afford to be inconvenienced. Camden said nothing for a moment. He thought about the morning. He thought about the brief he'd been working on since Tuesday that still wasn't right, and the partners' meeting at 4 that he was now almost certainly going to be late for, and the call he hadn't returned from his daughter because he hadn't known what to say. I had a minute, he said. Adele watched him the way she had watched him on the sidewalk, with those gray eyes that seemed to file things away. Did you actually have a minute? She said. Or did you need one? He looked at his tea. There was a long pause that was not uncomfortable. The second one, he said. She nodded as though this confirmed something. My husband used to do that. Take walks when things got heavy. He called it clearing the stack. She looked at the window. He's been gone 11 years, and I still catch myself starting to tell him things. Camden turned the mug in his hands. The ceramic was warm and slightly rough. My wife left 7 years ago, he said. Not the same thing. But I understand the habit of turning to say something to someone who isn't there. Adele didn't offer condolences or pivot to advice. She just said, yes, it doesn't fully go away. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They sat together in the warm room while the rain came down outside, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. He left 45 minutes later. She walked him to the door herself and shook his hand at the top of the stairs with the firm grip of someone who had shaken a great many hands and thought it worth doing properly. Thank you, she said, for the box, and for the company. Thank you for the tea. You're welcome to it whenever. She said it lightly, the way you say something that is half invitation and half formality, and he nodded and went down the stairs and back out into the cold. The rains had slowed to a mist. He walked back toward the parking garage on Clement, with his coat damp and his hands in his pockets, and he thought about the brief that still wasn't right, and the partners' meeting, and his daughter's call. He thought about all of it, which was what he always did. He had built his entire professional life on the capacity to hold many things at once, to see every angle, to let nothing slip. But he also thought about the book stacked on the radiator, and the woman who had read the same paperback 3 times and found something different in it each time, and about the simple structural fact that he had been on that block at that moment, moving in that direction, and she had been ahead of him with her arms full and the box going soft in the rain. He did not know why he was thinking about that. He was a man trained in causality and sequence. He knew how things happened and in what order. But some things he was learning. You just walk toward. He was late to the partners' meeting by 18 minutes. He sent no apology in advance, which was unusual enough that 2 of his colleagues exchanged glances when he came through the door. He sat down, opened his folder, and the meeting proceeded. No one asked where he'd been. That was how it was, in his world. You showed up or you didn't, and if you didn't, it meant something had happened, and if something had happened, you'd say so when the time was right and not before. He did not say so. He poured water into a glass and looked at the agenda and answered the questions that were put to him with the clarity and precision that had made him what he was. But a small part of him was still in the warm room on the 2nd floor, listening to the kettle tick. He drove home that evening on streets that were wet and dark and reflected the traffic lights in long orange smears, and he sat in his driveway for a moment before going inside, and then he called his daughter. Hi, she said. Surprised, a little. He usually texted. I got your message, he said. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I wasn't sure what to say. A pause. That's honest, at least. I'm trying to be. Another pause, longer. Then, we could have dinner this weekend. If you're free, I'll make sure I'm free, he said. He heard her exhale, not dramatically, just the small release of someone who had been waiting. Okay, she said. Saturday, he agreed. He went inside and made dinner, and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, because the dining room table was covered in files I'd brought home and hadn't looked at in 3 days. He washed the single plate and set it in the rack and turned off the light. He slept better than he had in weeks. He did not go back to Adele's street for the next 8 days. This was not a decision exactly. His mornings took a different route. His lunch hours were consumed by the brief, which was finally right and had been submitted, and was now someone else's problem. Life moved forward the way it did, Appointments, calls, documents, the particular kind of tiredness that had no name but settled in the chest by Thursday and didn't lift until Sunday. But on the 9th day, he had a morning meeting canceled and found himself with 90 minutes and no particular reason to go back to the office immediately, and he walked east on Alderton and then south and then east again without quite admitting where he was going. The building with the green awning looked the same. He stood on the sidewalk outside it for a moment, feeling faintly ridiculous, and then he went up the 4 steps and pressed the buzzer for 2B. Silence. He waited. Then, yes? Her voice through the speaker was exactly as he'd remembered it. Direct, unsentimental. It's Camden Brierly, he said. You gave me tea. A pause, then a sound that might, at a stretch, have been a laugh. The lawyer. The same. Hold on. The lock buzzed. He went up. She opened the door before he knocked, which told him she'd been watching for him through the peephole. She was wearing different clothes, but the same sharp expression. I didn't expect you, she said. I wasn't sure I was coming until I was here, honest answer. She stepped back to let him in. I was about to make coffee. Do you drink coffee? I drink coffee. Good. Tea is better, but I've had enough tea for one morning. He sat in the same chair with the pillow worn down from years of use, and she brought coffee in mismatched mugs, and outside the November sky had gone a pale gray that was almost white. You're different, she said, sitting. From when you were here before. Different how? She considered. Less like a man carrying something he's pretending isn't heavy. He looked at his coffee. I called my daughter. How'd that go? We're having dinner Saturday, good. She said it simply, without ceremony, the way you say something that was obviously the right thing and needed no particular comment. They talked for an hour. About her work. She had been a union organizer for 23 years and had not entirely stopped, in the informal way of people who make something their life's purpose and can't quite let it go. About his. She had opinions about corporate law that were not flattering but were well-argued, and she delivered them without apology, and he respected that enough to argue back, and they went several rounds before arriving at a kind of mutual understanding that didn't require either of them to concede. About her husband a little, about his marriage less, about the city, and what it had been and what it was becoming, which was a topic they agreed on more than he would have expected. He left you when she had a phone call she needed to take. She walked him to the landing again and shook his hand again. Next Tuesday, she said, as though this had been agreed upon. I'll bring something, he said. Coffee cake, she said. From Heller's on Marsh Street. Not the chain one. He found the right Heller's. The coffee cake came in a white paper bag with the top folded over twice and a sticker of a coffee cup on the front. He brought it on Tuesday. She was expecting him. This was how it went. Not every week. Sometimes 2 weeks passed, sometimes more. The city got colder and then colder still, and the holidays came and went. He spent Thanksgiving with his daughter and her husband, which was the first time in 4 years he had done so. And it was not as complicated as he had feared. He brought the coffee cake from Heller's, and his daughter said, "Where did you find this place?" And he said, "A woman I know recommended it." And his daughter looked at him in a way that suggested she had questions, but chose not to ask them. He and Adele talked about the labor movement, and about bad coffee, and about a city council decision she was furious about, and about a case he was working on that he described only in general terms. And she said enough that he went back to his office and changed his approach. And the outcome was better. She did not know this. He did not tell her. He thought about telling her. On a Tuesday in January, he arrived to find her sitting in her usual spot on the sofa with a book closed in her lap and her expression different from usual. Not sharp, not amused, just tired. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep. He set the coffee cake on the table and sat down without being told to. Hip, he said. Hip, she confirmed. And the thing is, I don't mind the pain. I mind what it means. He didn't ask what it meant. He knew what it meant. Pain that doesn't go away is a message, and the message is that things are changing, and they may not change back. I have a good orthopedist, he said. If you want a referral, I have a doctor. Does your doctor specialize in Camden? Her voice was dry. I'm not interested in a referral. Okay, I'm interested in someone sitting here while I'm annoyed about it. He settled back in the chair. I can do that. I know you can, she said. That's why I opened the door. Outside the window, the street was quiet. A bus went past. Somewhere below them, a door opened and closed. They sat there for a while, and she told him about the year her husband's health had started to turn, and how you don't notice it in the day-to-day, but you notice it looking back, and how that was perhaps mercy in disguise. He listened the way he listened in depositions, completely, without interrupting, except that here he wasn't building a case. He was just listening. When she was finished, she opened her book again. All right, she said. Coffee cake. He got up and found plates in the cabinet where she'd shown him they were kept, and he cut 2 slices, and they ate with the winter light coming in through the window, and neither of them said anything important for the rest of the hour, and it was one of the better afternoons he'd had in recent memory. He did not know, sitting there, that Adele had mentioned him to her niece the week before. He did not know that her niece had said, "Who is this person?" And Adele had said, "A lawyer who carried a box in the rain and didn't complain about the stairs." And her niece had said, "That's all?" And Adele had said, "That was enough." He did not know that Adele kept a journal, had kept one for 40 years, and that she had written about him in it twice, not romantically, not in any complicated way, just the way you write about something that surprises you. Man in his 60s, she had written, carries things and puts them down carefully, listens the way people used to listen. He did not know any of this. He finished his coffee cake and washed the plates because she'd told him once not to leave dishes in the sink, and he had not done so since. He found out, eventually, but not for a long time, and not from her. He found out because after she died the following October, her niece called him, which surprised him, and the niece said that Adele had wanted him to have the paperback with the broken spine, the one about the labor movement, the one she had read 3 times and found something different in each time. He drove over and collected it. He sat in his car, outside the building with the green awning. The awning was the same. The awning would probably outlast all of them. And he held the book in both hands and looked at it for a while. He thought about the sidewalk in the rain. He thought about the box going soft at the bottom. He thought about the way she had studied him before deciding to let him carry it, with those sharp gray eyes, the way you study something to determine whether it's real. He thought he understood now what she had decided. He opened to the first page. She had written something there in pencil, in the small, careful handwriting he'd seen on her notes and papers over the months. It was not addressed to him. She had written it to herself long ago, and then, he realized, decided to leave it where someone might eventually find it. The people who stop, she had written, are the ones worth knowing. Everyone else is just passing through. He closed the book carefully. He sat there for a moment longer. The street was quiet. A woman came out of the building next door with a stroller, negotiated the steps with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times, and moved on down the sidewalk without looking up. He watched her go. Then he started the car, and he drove home, and he put the book on the shelf in his study. Not with the law books, but with the other ones, the ones he kept, because they had changed the way he saw something, and he made dinner and ate it at the dining room table, which was clear now, because he had started clearing it some months ago and had kept up the habit. He did not think of himself as a changed man. He was suspicious of that kind of accounting, but he was different in small ways that had accumulated quietly. He returned his daughter's calls. He kept Tuesdays lighter than he used to. He had learned where Heller's was, and he went sometimes even when there was no one to bring coffee cake to. He stopped, when he could, for people whose arms were full. He had always believed that character was revealed in the large decisions, the cases you took or didn't, the stands you made, the moments history might record. He still believed that. But he had also learned, from a woman with sharp gray eyes and a book she'd read 3 times, that it was equally revealed in the small ones. The box in the rain, the 4 flights of stairs, the afternoon you stay because someone needs you to sit there while they're annoyed about their hip. Those moments didn't make it into any record. But they were the ones he had come to understand that you carried with you. Not as weight, as ballast, the kind that keeps you upright when things get rough and the wind comes from a direction you didn't expect. He kept the book for the rest of his life.